and then bring the juice.
Hello and welcome back to the Edge of Greatness. I'm Charles Schultz and I'm excited to have you here today. And I'm bringing on a special guest, Randy Chevrier, of the co-host of the Chevy and Nasty Show. And this is going to be a new behind the scenes of what greatness looks like from a world perspective of Randy, which is going to be fun because we're going to take a peek behind some of the differences between how I look at greatness and how other people look at greatness. And I think this component of learning from others and applying it to your life is what we need in order to discover how we are designed to find our own greatness. So I'm excited to dive into a full conversation today in a world of greatness with Randy Chevrier, and he will be joining us here in just a second. Randy, my man, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Charles, thanks for having me on your show. This is awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I wanted to start somewhere that you've been before that I experienced for the first time from kind of a secondary perspective, which is the NFL draft happened this last weekend. And a buddy of mine that I trained in high school got the opportunity to get drafted by the Buffalo Bills. Dwayne Carter had him on the show, but you mentioned having this moment of nostalgia to looking back on your time going through the draft process. Talk to me about your experience the weekend that you got drafted.
Yeah, it was crazy. The draft back in 2001 when I got drafted was a lot different than it is now. I mean, it was a different generation, right? There was no social media. There's barely any YouTube. The world was different back then. It was a lot simpler, but I think getting drafted was a lot harder back then because, I mean, if you wanted to get drafted, you had to send video cassettes and you had to get them to GMs, coaches, personnel guys. And I played university ball in Canada. So I went to McGill University in Montreal. The caliber of Canadian university football is definitely not the same as NCAA Division One. There are really great players up there, but the caliber's gotten better in the last 20 years. But definitely back then, to be in the running to be drafted was almost an impossibility. So for me, it was a very, very special weekend. A lot of things had to fall into place very luckily in order for me to be in that position where I recall it was on the Sunday. I was locked in my sister's bedroom because she was the only person that had a computer in the house. We had dial-up internet because that's all we had back then. And if you used the internet, it took your phone line. So every 10, 20 minutes, I would hook into the internet, update the ESPN page, and there was no video or anything back in the day, just to see what the picks were. And so I had been locked in my sister's bedroom. In those days, it was only a Saturday, Sunday event. They did the first, I believe, 3 rounds on the Saturday and then the rest on the Sunday. And so when my name got called, it was the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was actually Tom Coughlin that called me up. And he asked me if I was ready to be a Jaguar. And that was my experience. It was so surreal. It was weird. There was no pomp and circumstance like there is now. You know, you look at Motor City Music Hall with all the different people calling the names and stuff. It was just kind of a very understated event. But for me, it was the biggest thing that had happened in my life at that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's the interesting part is while things have changed, it's still one of those moments that you always will remember, whether it was highlighted on ESPN or not. It's just something that's always going to stick with you. What I really want to do is I want to dive into the transition from athletic performance greatness to life after sports greatness, because I think a lot of what I try to do is use the lessons of sport, use the lessons of competition to transition to life after and how we still go after greatness, how we still pursue it. So one of the great things about being an athlete is you have that singular focus, that purpose, right? You're driven to excel at a specific thing for a certain amount of time. How did you redirect that purpose when you're playing these roles?
Well, I think It took me a while to understand that. It's actually interesting because the draft was probably, again, going back to the draft, it really affects us because right after being drafted on the Sunday, we flew into Jacksonville. And I'm sitting in an auditorium. I got drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars in the 7th round. I can't remember what number, maybe 211. And we're sitting in an auditorium with all the team. It was the first team meeting. And Frank Gans, who was a legendary special teams coach at the time, walked in the room and he delivered a message. And his message was this: welcome to the NFL, gentlemen. From this day forward, we're trying to replace you. And that message burned and etched itself into my brain for the entirety of my career and still to this day in my life. And that message was, you have to be ready for what's next. And so that, along with some other skills that I developed along the way in life, allowed me to constantly focus on football, but at the same time, look at what other opportunities are there. And I spent the bulk of my professional career, 16 seasons in the Canadian Football League. And for those of your listeners that don't know, the Canadian Football League it's a great league. It's probably one of the oldest sports leagues in North America, but it doesn't pay very well. I mean, you look at some guys, top quarterbacks might be making 450,000 Canadian, but there's a whole bunch of guys making anywhere from 60 to 70 grand, which is still respectable to play football. But when it's done, it's done. So if you're going to play 16 years and come out at the other side of 40, you better have a plan, right? So every year that I played football, I was looking for something to do. I have a teaching degree. I did real estate. I did sales. I did mortgages. I tried so many different things in my off season to see what would ignite the fire under me. And speaking of fire, that's when I hooked up with some former players. One of our former great Hall of Fame Canadian Football League player, Stu Laird. He's a local guy in Calgary here. He was also a fire chief. And I sat down with him to talk about the career in the fire service. So, to make that really long story short, I was exploring. I was always exploring. I couldn't just sit down and prepare for football. It was hard because I knew guys that just spent their days training for football in the off season, and that's it, playing video games, working on nutrition. While I had 3 kids. I had a job in the off season, whatever it was, whether it was, like I said, teaching, sales, mortgages, speaking. And then I was training 3-4 hours a day, and it was tough, but I played till I was 40. Right. And that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I committed to. So the transition was still tough because I spent a year between being on the football field. So in 2016, I had been released by the Calgary Stampeders in February, and I didn't get into the fire department until July 2017. And in that year, that window between the football career ending and me getting on with fire, it was a real tough time. It was very uncertain. It felt like, my identity, I still wanted to play football because it was comfortable. I knew what it was, even though it was tough and it was hard. I was comfortable in that. And I always thought about my teammates that never worked on any post-football life skills, how much in dire straits they are. Like, I had an idea. Like, I thought, okay, I think I'm going to get in the fire department. If I don't make it, I can fall back to teaching. I had some plans. There are some guys in their 20s and 30s that had nothing planned, nothing prepared. And unfortunately, we see stories all the time of former athletes, whether it's baseball, football, hockey, that they don't have a plan. They blow through any savings they have, and then they wind up bankrupt on the streets. So I didn't want to wind up like that. I wanted to make sure I had something that was respectable, a career that I could be proud of. And so that's how I transitioned into fire.
You said something interesting there during that answer. And one of the things that I took away was that's something you committed to. Mm-hmm. And commitment is one of my pillars. I believe that without commitment, we don't achieve the greatness that we're seeking. As a society, do you believe that we understand and use the word commitment right?
Yeah, I think we know what it is, but I don't think we're prepared to pay the price. And I go, we're talking about how my football career influenced my entire life, but it's true. I went to a university where nobody made it to the NFL. No, I was in a country where I think there might've been 5 guys before me that had made it to the NFL. I went to my university is kind of considered the Ivy League of Canada. McGill University, we put up more doctors, politicians, and heads of companies than we do football players. And here I started football, to tell you the truth. I started at the age of 18. So I started very late. And I went to university after only 1 year of organized football. And I showed up and I set some goals and I committed to those goals. I stayed away from all the parties. I stayed away from, all the drinking, all the stuff, because we had a world-class facility and we had guys that came there from all over Canada. And all these guys were better football players than me. They all were. Like the year before, I didn't even know how to put my pads in my pants. And now I'm playing with these guys, but I committed and I set some goals, some reasonable goals. My first year, I remember walking into my coach's office, Charlie Bailey, and saying, "Hey, listen, I want to be the rookie of the year." Now, the great thing is I did not know what the establishment was. I did not know what the system was. I didn't know how impossible every goal I set was. So I didn't believe that I couldn't make it. I actually believed in everything I said because I didn't know all the big time players that existed in college that never made it. I didn't know the history. You know what I mean? It's like, when you know baseball, you know every guy that played, his batting average. I knew nothing. I knew a couple of names and that's it. But I showed up ready to work, ready to do what my coaches said. And I set goals. And my first goal was I wanted to be the rookie of the year. And then by my third year, I wanted to be all Canadian. And I there's a game. It's called the East-West Shrine Game. It's the oldest college all-star game in the United States. And every year they would invite 2 Canadians. And I told my coach in my first day meeting him, I said, "Coach, my goal for my 5th year is to get to that game." And that was like the pinnacle for me, was to get to that game, was to work towards being one of the guys from Canada invited to the U.S. College All-Star Game to show everyone that I made it. I didn't even think about pro in my first day. And then as the years went on, I had some setbacks, some major setbacks that I had to develop, the skill of resiliency, which I know is another one of your pillars. And I had to fight through so many things to pay that price. And when I was in my 4th and 5th year at McGill, and I told guys, I think I could play in the NFL, and everyone thought it was nuts, I didn't. And I committed to it, and I paid the price, and I did all the workouts, and I wound up doing the things it took to get in the position where I was drafted.
How important do you believe belief is when it comes to making commitments, setting goals, driving your purpose, and all of the things that we talked about as far as going after greatness?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, in Canada, we live in the hotbed of hockey. And, my boys play hockey, and you watch the kids at the rink now, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds doing things that you wouldn't even have imagined 15 years ago watching adults do. The skill set is unbelievable. But some of them have been in the system so long that they don't believe, because if they didn't make that AAA team coming out of the Bantam draft, then they don't believe that they could take the long way around. But I'm a huge believer in the underdog. Like I said, I started football at 18. I had no clue what the sport was before I even played. So when I coach football, and I always tell the coach, I say, I have a hard time cutting guys because every guy that we would cut would be me. And I can't cut that guy. In fact, there's a kid I just saw the other day. He won an award. And 2 years ago, I coached spring football, which is like midget football they play. And we had this kid that, man, he got hurt like the first second on the field. The field was cold. He hit his knee on the ground. Then he was like checked out the rest of the season. Coaches wanted to cut him. And I said, "Coach, he's a big kid. Looks like he needs football more than football needs him. Let's keep him around. Let's see if we can motivate him." And it took about a half a year for us to get the pads on him. And I was like, "Shay, if you're here, you might as well start practicing." And so it took a while to get him going. We got him in this non-starter jamboree. He winds up playing the game, and he winds up doing well. And by the end of the year, I was able to get him in the rotation. And in our playoff game, our starter got hurt. Shay went in, and he went from a kid that just stood around for the first 4 games of the season to being an impactful guy. Last year, I didn't coach. And I came back to coach this year. So when I came back this year, I was like, "Yeah, whatever happened to that kid? Did he stick with football?" And and they're like, that guy was our team MVP last year. Like, he played offense, he played defense. We could not get him off the field. I'm like, "You're talking about the same kid?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Yeah, he was like the best player on our team." And now I just read the other day, he won some scholarship that will allow him to pursue his post-secondary studies. So belief is a huge thing, and not just belief in yourself, but having others that believe in you. I mean, I believed in myself, but I had some really amazing mentors at McGill University that believed in me because I put in the work, and they were willing to work with me because I was that kid that wanted it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that underdog stories and stories of resilience, they tug at the human spirit and the heartstrings of everybody who's ever wanted to pursue something. And I want to dive more into resilience in a moment, but I want to take a quick commercial break while we got the chance here. This is a good time to step away. But when we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about resilience.
Okay.
1 week after launching our exclusive sneak peek, NGBN TV was live for 3 days of continuous coverage from Super Bowl 58 in Las Vegas.
NGBN TV is live from Las Vegas for Super Bowl 58.
The one-of-a-kind streaming TV network for men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s was the conversation for the big game about men's mental health. In the world of athletes, celebrities, and influencers, we're on notice. But we're just getting started with new partnerships announced like the Team Nike 3-on-3 Championship and new platforms available to download the NGBN TV app. So, what are you waiting for? Download the app today from your favorite streaming device or check us out at ngbn.tv. This is NGBN TV.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with Randy Chevrier from the Chevy and Nasty Show. Before we stepped away, we were talking about resilience. And last week, I actually did a whole episode on resilience and the stories of resilience because I think that it's such a powerful motivator to hear people who overcome the struggles, who overcome the suffering that takes place on the journey to excellence. You even mentioned that you had some in your own life. I'm curious, what's your favorite story of resilience?
Well, I think there's a major one that impacted me for my entire life. Heading into my draft year, so we have 5 years of eligibility in Canada, and heading into my draft year, I had set the goal that I was going to go to the NFL. I had a couple of buddies that had been drafted in the CFL. I also did long snapping. My one buddy that played in the CFL, after a year in the CFL, he had an opportunity to play with the Seahawks, and I was like, man, I'm just as good as him. You know, I could go to the NFL too. Instead of going to the CFL, go straight to the NFL. So I had set this goal that I was going to go to the NFL, and I was working towards that. In my time at university, I worked as a doorman in some of the bars at the university. And in the summer, most summers in my university career, I was working at a steel mill. But that last summer there, I wanted to kind of lighten my workload. I want to focus on football training. So I was just working the doorman job 2 nights a week at a bar in Montreal. Long story short, it's pretty interesting. That day, I was running track. I ran with the track team, and I had shin splints, and I was in pain. And yeah, everything was just not feeling good. You know, everything was off. You had one of those training days where you just want to kind of quit, and not quit because you hate it, but quit because it's like, well, what am I doing this for? Like, you know, I got my degree. I had already completed my teaching degree. I said, I could teach and make some real money for the first time in my life. I could, you know, do what most people are going to do. Right. And I just had that moment where I was like, yeah, I don't know. And I went to work that night at the bar, and it was 3 a.m. And to make that story short, some guys started some trouble in the bar, and I got stabbed. So I got stabbed at 3 a.m. working a bar in Montreal. It was June. You know, obviously our season starts in September. I got stabbed in the chest. The blade went within 3 inches of an inch of my liver. Yeah, it was a pretty dangerous situation. I had tubes in my chest, you know, and yeah, it was one of those things where I hit the ground when the ambulance workers put me down on the ground to get me on the stretcher. And it was interesting because the minute I went down, all I thought is, I got to get back to football. And it was weird because, you know, here I was that day, I was like feeling sorry for myself. Oh, my shins are hurting, you know, like what are the chances of me even making it? Blah, 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 all this stuff, like feel sorry. And then the knife went in, I go down, my lung deflates, and all I thought is, I got to get back. And I remember I get to the hospital, they put a tube in my chest. I was sitting in the hospital for 2 weeks, draining fluids and blood and all that. And I would talk to the doctors, and they're like, well, we don't think you can play football this year, scar tissue, all that. And I said, well, I don't accept that answer. And I found a sports med doctor at McGill University because it's got a really good medical program. And one of the major orthopedic surgeons in Montreal was a former football player. And he prescribed sort of a return to play I guess protocol for me. And he said, listen, if you take this much time and you don't move, you don't do this for the next 5 to 7 weeks, and then we come back slowly, you could be potentially ready in time for the season. So I did it. I sat in a chair for, I don't know, I think it was 5 weeks. I sat in a recliner at my mom's house. I lost all the weight. Like, I was really in good shape that day that I got stabbed. And then all of a sudden, like, I lost 60 pounds, lost all my muscle mass. I was sitting there, I was shriveled up. And then when they gave me the clear to go start training, it was like, okay, it's time to go. And I remember I had 5 weeks to prepare for the season. And every day I would kind of sneak into the gym at the university. But then I also bought a membership to a gym down the road because I was kind of crazy. And I went down and I worked out. And I got back to the shape I was in training. When training camp started, I was at the shape I was right when I got stabbed. I kind of brought myself back to there. I wasn't where I wanted to be. I didn't reach the goals for all my 40 bench, all that stuff, but I was exactly where I was before I got stabbed. And then I showed up to training camp, and I had an amazing training camp and an amazing season. It actually, I tell everyone, I said it was like the season that was touched by God, because I wasn't that good and I wasn't that lucky. I worked hard and I was resilient, but I mean, I wound up having like an amazing season. I was defensive tackle. I got named the defensive lineman, or the lineman of the year in Canada, kind of the Canadian version of the Outland Trophy. I wanted to make it all Canadian, all that stuff. And then I got invited to that East-West Shrine game that I had set as a goal years earlier. And when I went to the East-West Shrine game, it was like a domino, where I went there as a defensive tackle. I had a great game, but I could also long snap. And in those days, they didn't invite long snappers to the All-Star game. So they were looking for a guy to long snap. And here I was, this defensive tackle that was pretty good, 300 pounds. And I can also long snap and get downfield faster. Like, whoa, we got to take a closer look. And that's kind of how everything went through. So that resilience that I developed when I got stabbed carried me forward many times, because my first year in the NFL was very hard. It didn't go according to plan. It was tough. It was a lot bigger than me. I played for the Dallas Cowboys, and we blew a game-winning field goal against the Raiders. And a lot of the eyes were pointed to me. I got blown up by 300-pound dudes. I got knocked on my ass. Kicker kicked the ball, guy blocked it, and coaches were like, yeah, that's your fault. And everybody reads about it. Your mom reads about it. And everyone thinks it's this glamorous thing when you're in the NFL, but the pressure is almost insurmountable. And because of the things I had been through, I could have mailed it in after that rookie year, but instead I learned that the worst thing had happened to me the year before, and I turned that into 16 years later. Not necessarily in the NFL, but I had a really great career that I'm very proud of.
No, I love that. And, when I hear your story and the injury and then suffering to come back, it makes me think of a quote that I love. Have you ever seen the movie Unbroken?
Yeah, I love
So
that
Louis
movie.
Zamperini talks about how his brother says, is a minute of suffering worth a lifetime of glory.
Yeah.
And I want to know, when you hear that quote, is a minute of suffering worth a lifetime of glory, what does that mean to you? What does that sound like to you?
I think that's little choices. That's little choices. That's like, you're hungry and you shouldn't eat like something crappy, and it's so easy to make that choice to eat it. How hard is it to make that choice not to eat, or drink, or get up to go to the gym in the morning and hit that snooze button? Like, whatever those little choices that you can make that prevent you from your goals, from all the goals that we want, that minute of suffering is really that. It's not it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It doesn't have to be me lying on the floor getting stabbed and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to come back and go Rocky story's going to start. Sometimes it's a little choice. Sometimes it's like you're exhausted on a Saturday afternoon, and I got 3 boys, and I'm doing chores, and there's taking a minute to say, hey, you guys want to go play outside? You want to do something, whether they want to or not. Those little things, or having to fight with them to say, you know what, guys, you're going to come with me today. And they're like, oh, Dad, I don't want to come with you. I want to sit and play my video games. And that spending that time is worthwhile, and you have to have a fight with them to get them to the other side. But if you don't have that fight and you choose easy, say, you know what, just sit down, do your thing on the couch. I'm going to go do my thing. That's where we choose easy. So I think that minute of suffering for a lifetime of glory means to make those little hard choices once in a while that impact not just yourself, but others too.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the way you look at that. I got one more question to finish up with, and I want to dive into this. What does the word courage mean to you?
I think courage means doing the things that are tough to do that a lot of times no one else will do. You know, the positive things, helping others out, you know, making tough choices. Again, it comes to choices. And I think courageous choices are always the tough ones to do, especially when you're the only one making those tough, courageous choices, right? It's easy to make a courageous choice when everyone's with you, but it usually takes one person to make that first choice to rally others behind them. So I think that's where courage lies. We're very social creatures. We like to fit in. And a lot of times doing the right thing means you won't fit in. And I think courage is going against our human nature and making choices sometimes that might cast you in a bad light, but you know are right.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. I think that sometimes you have to stand alone to be courageous, but then others will
Mm,
follow if you're doing the right
yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And I think
And
the way
that's
you work,
leadership too.
yeah,
That's leader.
oh,
Yeah, it's leadership,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely. Well, Chevy, man, I absolutely love this conversation. It flew by and it went
Yeah.
way too fast. So we might have you back on to touch on some of the other pillars and dig a little deeper into some of your story. But I do want to say thank you for taking time to join me today.
Appreciate you, Charles. Thanks for having me. That was fun.
Absolutely. Make sure you check out Chevy and Nasty Show. It is on the NGBN network Tuesday nights. It is what, 12 a.m. Eastern? Is that right?
It's
1 a.m. Eastern?
1 a.m. Eastern. We do
1 a.m.
11.
Eastern. So
We
if you're
do,
part of the Midnight
yeah.
Oil, make sure you check that one out. If you're on the West Coast, it's a little bit easier for you. But if not, watch the reruns. I mean, it's totally worth it. It's a great show. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great time. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat in your face. Remember, whenever we fall, always get up.